We can introduce the great and the good Dr. Michael Klein, who is a teacher of teachers. And Michael, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Okay. I'm Michael Klein. I'm a psychologist.
You don't have to introduce yourself, I did it. So what do you do on a regular basis?
On a daily basis, half my time is treating patients in psychotherapy. I've done that for over 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
Done about 15,000 hours of therapy myself. And about 5-6 years ago, I formed a group practice and hired therapists. And my other main role now is training the young therapists. So I'm coaching these young clinicians to develop their skills, knowledge, and ability to work with patients that we see in our practice.
So how did we get to talk about this?
We got to talk about this because I was fortunate enough to meet you through a mutual acquaintance, and we started working on my game, and I started telling you about all the overlaps I saw between being a therapist and being a golf coach. And I've been thinking about this for decades, frankly, and I just finally started to write it down, because when I'm on the golf course, I'm talking to golfers, not like a therapist, but I'm curious about people always, and I'm very interested in their inner experience and sort of performance experience in their game, because I've, the overlaps in terms of performing your best.
And then by trying to get better, you've been to different coaches. So you've seen some of the different spectrum of teaching skills. Well, let's say coaching skills versus teaching skills.
Until I worked with you, the coaching skills we're not a focus, as Pia and Lynn were talking about. The human skills part of coaching is a new frontier, and I really see my work as extending their work quite a deal.
I've seen some of this presentation, so I'm very excited that when you're a coach, you're working with a human being. You're not working with a machine, right? Which is always part of my presentation, and to get better results, which is what we all want. You get paid better, and you have more satisfaction if you're in it for the reasons of altruism than being a better coach of humans first, and then a better coach of golf swings.
And I really hope to make a good case that in teaching therapists to be great therapists, there's a knowledge and a technical piece, and then the biggest other component is their human skills, their ability to connect and communicate. And there's a direct overlap. The knowledge piece is different. It's more about the golf swing and performing well. But the boxes are exactly the same. And this whole presentation is about applying what I've learned about creating great therapists to help you become even better coaches.
So why have we got a peregrine falcon on the screen?
Peregrine falcon is the fastest animal in the world. When they dive, they're predators. They dive bomb and they prey on other birds. And in their tucked position, they can hit speeds over 200 miles an hour. So we'll see if Bryson gets to 200 miles an hour.
He's like about 210, I think I've seen.
Ball speed.
Ball speed, yeah, that's right. You're also chasing speed, right?
I am chasing speed with you,
so
and I've made progress.
That's good.
Yes.
All right. So why don't you jump into your thing now?
So I'll skip the bio.
Yeah. We can send out emails.
Yeah, of course. Last thing to say is I write and study expertise, the literature on peak performance, and I've written a whole paper that's under review at a journal, so that there really is an overlap of interests and intellectual interests. So we talked about this. I've been a psychologist for over 10 years. So I used to joke that I before I went into psychology, I coached. I thought about going into golf coaching and instruction. I was a decent player, and I gave that dream to go into psychology because golfers don't change because they're not miserable enough usually. So at least in psychology, by the time they arrive to you, they're so miserable and downtrodden that they're ready and highly motivated to change. One of the things we're going to talk about is golf students, players' motivation to change, the barriers to those change in very great detail, and give you new tools to assess where they are in their motivation to change process understand some of those barriers and how to help them move through those barriers.
You know, the other people that change are the ones that go to Mike Adams. Because it's the opposite. They're so excited to see him.
Yes.
That they're also, you know, that kind of rapport, right? So
yes.
It's interesting.
Well, once you have a reputation and
helps.
you draw, right, it's not random selection, right? They're self-selecting.
Right.
And people who are going, sometimes to esteemed people who are known, that edge of being a known sort of person and having that halo of expertise and ability helps a lot. I'm actually going to touch on that slightly in terms of how students look up to you, and that's one of the wheels of motivating them to change. So really my goal is to expand your understanding of students' emotional needs. So this is where it links right to Vision 54 and the human skills. I'm going to help flesh out some of the human skills that I think are critical in golf, and I love that, you know, yesterday they were focusing on how come I can't take it from the tee to the course, and really that's the link I'm looking at. So a big topic is why students resist change and how to facilitate that.
Yeah, I think from a teacher standpoint, we see the same thing, right? So we potentially have an idea that we think something is the right thing to teach, but you know, stuffing that into somebody is a skillful activity.
Absolutely. And you will start to notice the markers of when people are ready, and I'm going to talk about how to get them ready. And this is the exciting piece, that the emotional skill building for players to be ready and prepared and make changes is coachable, right? It's not someone who comes, right? That would, if people weren't coachable, therapy wouldn't work, and therapy does work. So this is, again, I want to make it very clear that I'm trying to apply my professional life to the golf coaching experience directly. So some of the topics I'm going to touch on is this. I'm going to introduce this idea of narcissism. I'm going to talk about anxiety, and actually even how shame and loss, really directly emotional topics, have a direct bearing on golf coaching. And I'm going to describe some methods and give you some new tools for how to overcome these barriers to change. So, you know, when Pia and Lynn are talking about the human skills, they're talking about things that promote change and high performance and can be sort of performance killers. And I would put a big, broad category that intense emotional arousal is one of the things. When people don't recognize that well, they talk a lot about awareness, and manage it well, their performance decreases a lot. And so this is a fun thing. A lot of people talk about fear. Oh, he's fearful over the tee, his tee shots. But technically fear, my joke is, fear is for snakes, anxiety is for 3-footers. So the big difference is fear is a natural human response to an immediately present danger. Anxiety is the worry that something bad could happen, but you're not sure if it will. I was joking with Terry, gazelles don't have anxiety, they have fear. Because if they're eating grass and a lion tries to eat them, they run away, they get away, they start eating grass. But if we were a gazelle, we would say, what if the lion's right around the corner again, and be terrified and not actually be able to shut down that fear response. So it's a fear response of something that could happen in the future. So anxiety is worry about a future negative consequence. This is very, very important, because one of the ways you can help students develop arousal management is using the time frame. If anxiety is always future oriented, then training and helping players to come back into the present moment is an anti-anxiety tool. And I think one of the things in Vision 54, they focus so much on the body, I was thinking about this, is the somatic awareness in the body is a present-oriented tool. So that's one way to get back into the present. So I'm giving you the more general principle, arguably, under what's so effective about one of their ways that they train golfers to work on arousal management. So very quickly, right, I work with a lot of traumatized patients, and very briefly, to understand what trauma does in the brain and in the body and in the emotional systems, the most important thing is a trauma response is a feeling of being trapped and defenseless. and if we apply it to golf, there's a direct relation, which is they feel they can't execute. They feel trapped. They don't know where their swing is. They don't know where their body is. They don't know where the club face is. So that brings arousal up. Everybody knows what it feels to feel highly anxious and butterflies, hands sweating, even nausea, things of that nature. And this mimics a trauma state. And you might have even heard fight, flight, or freeze. So these are the responses the body gives to a signal of danger. And so how can you assist students to transition out of freeze is something I want to talk a great deal about. So the ultimate anti-anxiety, anti-worry weapon is present-minded focus, and we've all heard of this, that you have to be totally committed to a shot. Anything less than total commitment is not good enough. That's true, and the reason that's so important is it's the opposite of anxiety. Commitment and focus is with intention and is the opposite of worry. So a focused mind, the opposite state is what we call agency. And this is a beautiful word to kind of get a definition. The opposite of anxiety and worry is agency. Agency is a feeling that you are equipped to do what you intend to do. You are able to move towards the present goal that you have in mind. So that's very important to contrast. So one of the key takeaways here is the main barrier transitioning from the practice tee to course probably is something you're going to start to assess more is high arousal and worry, which functionally is a definition of anxiety. Now this is really, I think, exciting. So this is from all the research on the brain and the mind and how thoughts and feelings relate to each other. This is from sort of academic psychology, but extremely useful. The problem in golf is thoughts and feelings are inextricably bound together. They mutually influence each other, so that you can intervene from either side. So emotion and arousal, and our jargon is affect, intermingles with cognition and thoughts. And bad thoughts go with high arousal, which is negative arousal about future negative consequences. So I'm actually going to give you like a case study of this is a real person, my friend. He was a college player. And what I did, I took Pia and Lynn's approach to watching the player on the course one step further. I walked the course with him. And his game was in such shambles that just playing in front of other people was enough to give him so much arousal. He would get shanks, and he was terrified. And he was so courageous in really opening up what was happening inside. I walked with him as if I was his therapist and said, just tell me what's happening inside of you. And this is a summary. Mike, I can't hit this shot. I'm terrified. High arousal, negative affect. I don't even want to be here. It's so subtle. That's the flight response to high arousal. So he felt helpless. He had peak negative arousal, and avoidance is even the action tendency. It would not be surprising to me at all if a player in high sort of performance setting, if they were totally honest with themselves, with you, they wish they could leave the course and go home. Avoidance is the key sort of behavioral response to high anxiety. That's why panic disorder is actually avoiding places where you might have one. The presence of anxiety is not a panic disorder. It's the avoidance of any situation that might elicit one, which is interesting. So then he said, okay, so I'm highly aroused, I have negative thoughts. How do I block the bad thoughts? And this is where I'm going to move into methods that you can start to assess with students in terms of their style and give them new skills, those human skills. So the first problem, I would say, Mr. A, athlete, because he was a great athlete, a great player at one point, was acceptance. He shanked his drive off the first tee. This guy is 120 mile an hour club speed, and I've seen him hit the ball 330. He said, that shot, it's not me. You see how he's distancing himself from what he just did, right? So the part of him that is sort of downtrodden and kind of like his game is broken down, he's not accepting that. And this is what I want to introduce, this idea of an arousal management system. He doesn't have one. So when I asked him, what do you do when you're feeling nervous and have these bad thoughts? Well, he said, Doc, how do I get rid of them? So arousal management is what they're talking about in the memory box, play box, think box. It goes all the way through, managing your emotions. So the first part of developing an arousal management system is recognizing that you're highly aroused and you might even be having bad thoughts. The second part is accepting that's where you are. And then the third part, which I think is going to be particularly useful right off the bat, is how do they develop a arousal awareness management plan? So people have tendencies. Like we know there are like the players who run hot on the course, they run cool. There are cultural differences, but that's not really the main piece. The piece is assessing the individual player in front of you. So I had planned, this is a joke, there's from Point Break, any of you have seen this movie, but a player at my club who's a legitimate scratch and performs very well in tournaments, I just asked him, what's your arousal management system plan? What do you do when the pressure is on? He says, I just think of Patrick Swayze. Now, it's both hilarious, and I'll tell you what the punchline is there, but it's amazing to me that he had an immediate answer.
You see, fear causes hesitation, and hesitation will cause your worst fears to come true. So it's simple. You project strength to avoid conflict.
But it was so great that this guy said Patrick Swayze. He thinks about Patrick Swayze. It's humorous. It gives him a little distance from the feeling, and he's a very high-performing golfer. But again, the most important thing is he could answer the question, what is your arousal management approach? And you can translate that jargon to your students and to your top players, which is, how do you manage yourself when the pressure is on? Most of your players won't be able to answer that question. So I'm going to give you an idea is you want to, in assessing and helping on that human skill side, you're going to assess every student. Any student who hopes to play at their best, keep score, break through scoring barriers, win their club championship, win the U.S. Amateur, be a major champion, needs to start to consider their human skills, and you can help them. What is your arousal management approach during a round? What do you do when the pressure is on? So now I'm going to give you examples from our top performing PGA Tour players and show you there are different arousal management approaches, which you're going to recognize immediately, and you can start to notice what kind of player, what is the emotional anatomy in the player that I'm teaching here. So you can teach arousal management you say, I'm not a shrink, how am I supposed to do that? Well, let's think about it. Mimic the greats. This is directly from Faraday. This is a direct quote. He asked him, what do you do when the pressure is on? Bryson says, in tough pressure situations, I don't get nervous. I'm so occupied with the process. We all know he's famous for asking what the barometric pressure is, or the wind direction. Well, wind direction, maybe everybody wants to know. But the dew point, and everyone's like, what is he doing? Like, it's a 1.3% difference in carry distance. Let me tell you something. It's actually not about the dew point. Bryson has an intellectual arousal management system. Details and information keep him calm. So Bryson's arousal management system is an information-based one. The jargon for this in our field is he has an obsessional or intellectualized style. So we say, why doesn't so much information overwhelm him? Is it keeps the anxiety, high arousal, negative emotion to a minimum. He doesn't even notice it or feel it because he's so involved in the process. And being involved in the process is present-oriented. Now let me contrast you with Dustin Johnson. This is the way I see Dustin Johnson's arousal management approach. It is not true that he's just a super laid-back California guy. That would betray his skill and not be fair to him and not let you lend this to a player that's more suitable for him. He says, this is a direct quote, telling me I can't do something is the worst thing anyone can say because I'll definitely do it. I'm very determined. This is an intense guy. But on the golf course, he's somebody who isn't concerned with every minute detail. He wants a number and he wants a target. He wants a, quote, empty mind. He doesn't want to be thinking. An unthinking, clear mind is also an unanxious mind. He's not having high negative thoughts. He's not saying, don't hit it in the water. He's not saying, what if I miss this putt? His mind is clear. So a full mind with information can be present-oriented, and a very empty, clear mind is also an unanxious mind. That's the link, even though those styles are diametrically opposed, they both work. And your player that's in front of you may be more inclined to one or the others. So my most exciting idea that I've started to talk to Terry and hopefully Mike about is this idea of ultimate golf lesson at the technical side. You're going to start to have a method to assess and sort of put people into the appropriate arousal management system for their type of game, and their performance will go through the roof. So Professor Dustin, more wisdom from him. The way I see it, there are only two things that can happen. You can hit a good shot or a bad shot, so why waste time? His point is, he doesn't want a mind with thoughts. And there's even a little bit of research in the expertise world where it is true that standing over the ball too long prevents sort of unconscious procedural knowledge to take over, and that sort of automatic, just step up and hit it, does produce better results, whether you're pole vaulting or hitting a tee shot. So this idea of don't waste time, just get up there and do it, allows the person's, all those thousands of hours of practice and that sort of execution to be optimal. So I'm going to discuss some other tools you can use for helping students develop arousal management systems. This is useful. This is maybe for the more advanced player. Let me just bring this up. The player that knows a lot about the swing, right, knows the D plane, has learned from Terry and Mike and the ultimate golf lesson, sort of that approach that Mike will say, oh, I'll just, close their stance a little and that'll help them move the path. High golf IQ players who know that, allowing them the space on the course, not to just swing the right, find the right motion or their perfect swing, having room to adjust a little bit within their knowledge base creates more agency from them. So you can support their willingness to make small adjustments based on their knowledge of their proclivities, the feared shot, and this is the emotional principle under that is, if trauma and freeze is I'm defenseless, I'm trapped, I have no options, if I could just close my stance a little and that might move the path and help my ball flight, suddenly it's not really a technical thing, it's I have room to make a change. I'm no longer in a trauma-free state. I have agency. There's something I can do to improve my performance. So that's, I think, a particularly interesting one. And this is the most important thing. High arousal is then interpreted by the mind with thoughts. We make meaning out of arousal. So I can interpret arousal as there's something bad that's going to happen, this is dangerous. Or I can say, oh my God, I'm really nervous because I have a lead on Sunday for the first time. This is so exciting. This is what I want to be happening. This is what I worked so many hours and years to get to. I'm nervous because something important is happening. So I like this. Helping players at any level interpret high arousal as desirable rather than dangerous. I'm here because this is what I've been working towards, is a different interpretation of high arousal and making the high emotionality and the thinking work for them. That will produce that idea that, oh, they're so focused. Actually, a focused mind is often somewhat anxious, some arousal. Okay, so I'm going to move into a very different topic about a really interesting thing that we all know is very, very common at every strata of golf, at the individual player level, and you're going to recognize these things. So I'm going to do something a little playful. If you think of what words come to mind when I say things like grandiose, condescending, entitled, arrogant, unempathic, a braggart, a sore loser, ambitious, persistent, motivated, confident, guided by ideals. Just take a moment and what comes to mind? What words or what do you associate to? Now you might have a variety of ideas, but my point is actually I tricked you. They're all related to narcissism. And I'm going to give you a very basic, straightforward definition. But narcissism both promotes great playing and can be a huge hindrance. So I'm going to make the case that your understanding of this one concept and starting to see how each person's sort of narcissistic sort of personality traits and abilities works for them or against them is critical to helping people develop human skills. And you as their coach can help them develop into a more favorable sort of form of narcissism in terms of their golf. So I am going to read this because it's input. This is the one academic jargony thing I want to teach today. So narcissism is a critical concept. Heinz Kohut, one of my sort of, he's dead, but one of my influences as a psychologist, he describes the gleam in the mother's eye, which supports and encourages the development of the self. The first is the grandiose self, that's the baby or the child, an exhibitionistic line which wishes to convey the message, I'm perfect. Do you see I'm perfect? And the second is the idealized parent. Now I hate to break it to you, you're the idealized parent when a student comes to you. They want to seek a powerful figure who they can admire, look up to, and draw strength from. And they want to bask in your power and strength. So you're perfect, and I'm just like you. We call that twinship in therapy. So just one more thing about narcissism for your own edification, and it's relevant. People who get a lot of what we call attaboys, which is great job. You really hit that. You did that great. You're so good at that, and they don't grow up to constantly need to be the center of attention or arrogant. It's the opposite. The child who doesn't get it when they need it during that critical period is the one who grows up with more narcissistic difficulties in terms of their adult personality. So he may say, this sounds awful clinical. What does it have to do with golf coaching? I'm going to try to make a very clear case a lot. So here's the key point. Think of your golfer in front of you, whether 60 years old and a titan in the world of business, as having a golfer self that has had varying levels of growth and sort of attaboys and encouragement. And that golfer self may need a lot of support and praise and admiration from you initially. Things that, and even saying, I believe in you, you can do it. And it's possible some of you out there are resisting this idea, which is, you don't want to spoil them, or you don't want to you want to overdo it, they'll need that forever. But you gotta consider this, which is that it's one of the things that bridges them during the change process. All that encouragement, I believe in you, and then looking up to you as a powerful, strong figure is one of the things that supports them when they're struggling to change their swing or their outlook. So you become their strong golf parent is the truth. And that's one of the reasons I think you can promote more change or slow it down. So in juniors, many of you work with juniors, right? Watch me, coach, did you see that one? That's them looking for attaboys as their golfer self gets energized and more strong. And they need to feel that you see them as amazing and potentially even better than they currently are. And that's that gleam in the mother's eye. So this is my daughter. She's almost 5. Dad, I did it all by myself. Did you see? She just said this a few weeks ago. So the correct response there was, great job. You're getting so big. I was joking with Terry. She put her shoe on by herself, and there's no laces. So putting her shoe on was enough to say, hey, look how big and grown up and independent I'm getting. So at 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, it's critical that people get that sort of oxygen for the self to grow into a big, strong, stable sort of person. So the question becomes, can you be their good object? That's jargon. But can you be their strong sort of parent who looks at them admiringly and praises them? And like it or not, students need to be able to look up to you. And that, again, this is in assisting in the change process. So Another thing about narcissism is you need a lot of it to think you're going to be a top player. You have to be able to say, I'm going to win the U.S. Amateur. So a sense of greatness, poise, calmness, and strength is the foundation of ambition and ideals to even dream big. So this idea that, oh, narcissism is negative, it's much more complicated than that. If you don't have enough of it, you can't believe that you're going to play at the top level or even win your local state championship. But there is a catch. This is why we often bristle at this idea of narcissistic. Grandiosity without honesty about the self and our abilities yields terrible results. The truth is that Mr. A, who had all that high arousal I was talking about earlier, he was good about being open about what was going on inside of him, but not so good on acceptance. That's shot, Mike. It's not me. So who wants to admit they're terrified, right? This is not, it takes courage to do that. So grandiosity plus self-appraisal is what yields greatness and peak performance. And what I mean by self-appraisal is an honest assessment of what they're capable of doing, not capable of doing, and that willingness to be self-critical but also believe I'm amazing and I'm going to win the U.S. Amateur is the secret sauce for greatness in most endeavors and certainly in golf. Okay? Here's a really interesting way to illustrate what I would call the skill of self-appraisal and honest sort of the offsetting of too much anxiety. This is the Arcos data that was published. I think a lot of people probably know about this, which is really cool. The sensors go into the clubs, actual distances players hit. Now we know club speed is directly correlated with skill and handicap, right? Higher club speed yields, all things being equal, a better player. So there's a parallel in terms of honest self-appraisal. This is by handicap, 20, 10, 0. The carry distances, actual carry distances, by skill level. So we can see here, the high handicapper estimated they carry their 7-iron 162. The actual data was 140, a 22-yard difference. Now when we move across the left from 10 to a scratch player, 0 handicap, we see that that gap shrinks. And it shrinks a lot, 100%. Right? 22 yards is double the 11-yard distance. So it's a human skill, in this instance, just estimating carry distances. And what's the most common thing we talk about incessantly is nobody takes enough club. Nobody would talk about a grandiosity not supported by honest self-appraisal as the basis of not taking enough club. So this is what I'm presenting to you today. So a grandiosity without self-appraisal is a learning killer. This idea of threats to the ego, that I only hit my 7-iron 140 yards, I'm maybe not as big and powerful a player yet as I would like to be. Why don't players take enough club? What blocks this? Narcissism. Too much narcissism without accurate, honest self-appraisal it leads to low performance, and I'm not going to go into too much detail about pathological narcissism. Honestly, it's too big a topic for today, but in a more extended training on these emotional human skills, it would be very useful to actually give you more ideas about how to spot that, assess it, and what to do about it with players who are really struggling to learn. So you get interesting permutations of narcissism and skill. Sometimes you get a high self-image, overestimating ability, and poor skill, right? That's not a good combination. That makes it hard for them to learn or take in new information. An interesting one is low self-image but high skill. The person who's, hitting 12 greens in regulation, but they hit a loose wedge once in a while and they're furious with themselves is a different sort of combination. So again, this is what would sort of come out in a more sort of extended immersive learning about how do you notice and train human skills in the areas of high arousal and here narcissism. But just to give you a sense that there's sort of an advanced way you would be able to do this. And I'm sure great coaches have a bead on this. They've just never heard like terminology or language added to this. And this is really fascinating. This is right out of an interview I saw Mike Adams interviewed. Not too much narcissism, low self-appraisal and honesty, a learning killer. They're not going to believe, it's going to be hard for them to hear you don't hit it as far as you believe you do. However, not enough narcissism is a problem too. Players feel they don't deserve to shoot a good score unless they are hitting it perfect. Direct quote, Mike Adams. Here's where it gets really interesting. Somebody with high narcissism and good self-appraisal has to be able to say to themselves, I can't hit it today, but I'm still going to shoot 65. Am I entitled to win when I don't have my best stuff? Entitlement is narcissism. So high narcissism, high grandiosity is essential to win. So what can happen? They'll give a tournament away. This is where the psychoanalyst in me is talking to. Unconsciously, they do not believe they deserve to win. What do you know? They make 2 bogeys in the last 3 holes. Out of nowhere, they don't win the tournament. So this is where it gets super emotionally complicated in terms of they're not even aware that they don't feel entitled to win. They shoot a higher score than they could have just because they don't have their best stuff. I'm not going to go into this because the videos aren't working, but many of us, probably all of this audience, remembers this. Dear Patrick Reed, 2014, saying, I'm probably top 5 player in the world. And the golf world was like, the horror, how could he say that out loud? And I think the golf community has a complicated relationship to entitlement, narcissism, and grandiosity. He said, I think he should wait his turn. And he'd won 3 times by this point as a young person in his early 20s. God forbid the kid sort of spouts out in public, that he thinks he's a top player at this point. And the commentator, when they showed the clip, said, wow, like, who does he think he is? What was it? Who does he think he is? He's 23 and a half and he has 3 PGA Tour wins.
Curtis Strange interviewing Tiger Woods. It's like, you'll learn, kid. You'll learn.
you need to. So my point here is at the cultural community level, it's how dare you say that? And listen, kid, if you don't think you can win every week, don't even tee it up, right? So we actually send a mixed message. It's just another way narcissism suffuses the world of professional golf in this instance. So I'm not going to go through that. So just to summarize, all children healthily crave those attaboys like oxygen for years. Too little of it manifests as problems in adulthood, and golfers are often looking to heal that kind of wounded golfer self that they bring to you, and sometimes need a lot of attaboys initially. Too little can prevent winning at any level. Am I entitled to win with less than my best stuff? It's a source of strength and a learning killer. That's the critical thing to take in particular here. That's why it's going to be important over time to be expanding your human skills, is assessing the way narcissism manifests in your student or your player. It's in everybody, and there are positive ways it manifests, and there are ways that really do hold people back to a great deal. Self-appraisal is learnable and a coachable skill. You could help them sort of become more realistic about their assessment of themselves and be more willing to work on areas of weakness, even though it makes them feel bad about themselves because they have some sort of, so we call them vulnerabilities, narcissistic vulnerabilities. Maybe I'm not as great as I believe I am. For instance, the example for the Arcos, tracking the carry distances. Now this is really a striking thing, and it's related to narcissism. Another question to pose to you is, why don't more players focus on areas that need the most work? If they're a great driver of the ball, why do they go to the range and hit 100 drivers and then hit a few wedges and go home? The emotional toll that narcissism takes on people is shame. Shame is directly related to narcissism and a threat to the ego or the self. So it's the most common thing we see clinically with patients who have real narcissistic problems. They will feel shame and then they'll actually have a rage response. That's a topic for another. That's for a clinical topic. But the fear of humiliation and shame is one of the emotional barriers to students sticking with things that feel new, unfamiliar, or uncomfortable. The fact that golf is played in public, in front of peers, if you play in a tournament, your number is going to go up there. And if there's too much of the self attached to the number, people will play scared or afraid, and they're trying to avoid shame. So shame, leaning into the possibility of feeling embarrassed, is courageous and vulnerable and necessary to learn and grow as a golfer. So that, going back to Mr. A with the high arousal and the game in shambles, helping students tolerate bad feelings like anxiety and shame is part of what's going to help them feel, and lending your strength to them. That's why those attaboys matter. Helping them bear shame, anxiety, doubt is what helps them, makes them recede from changing. So you're like showering them with admiration is both to heal that little golfer's self inside of them and help them sustain in tolerating bad feelings so they can change. Encouragement, attaboys, and instilling your belief in them. Remember, you're their strong, powerful golf parent. When you say, I believe you can do it, it makes more of a difference than you can even imagine. This is the fun thing. What do I think makes Butch the best? Everyone talks about him as maybe the most, among the most successful. I think he had an intuitive sense of attaboys and narcissism and helping people feel like, oh wow, this is Butch Harmon and he's amazing and he believes in me, and giving them that gleam in the mother's eye. I'm willing to bet Butch is a self-psychologist. That's the school of thought that Koha founded, that I was talking about as an influence on me. He has an intuitive understanding to not resist the emotional needs players need while they're making changes. He can give them that gleam in the mother's eye freely and help support their growth. And, you know, in another interview, Mike Adams was saying, oh, Butch, he's got magic dust. What's that magic dust made of? Narcissism. Lending them his powerful, grandiose self to feel strong and powerful and capable of learning during tough periods of like bad feelings, like shame and anxiety. So I'm going to move on to noticing different levels or stages of motivation for change and achievement. I'm going to move through this somewhat quicker. We could always discuss later in the conference at some point. But this is a fascinating thing. We know people sort of get the golf bug, right? They're obsessed. They're addicted. They're fascinated by it. And one way to notice talent in your students is someone who just gets kind of possessed by golf. They have almost like a painful need to figure out where their swing is, or what's a chip? What's the difference between a chip and a pitch? And they're sort of consumed by it, and they're fascinated by it. And this is a clip, again, this is from the Queen's Gambit. It's about a chess prodigy, a girl. This is worth watching, although I don't have the music.
We'll have it.
Yeah. This is her supposed to be asleep at night, can't sleep, and she imagining the chessboard on the ceiling. And as it sort of forms, you see her replaying the match from earlier in the day. And she's so consumed by chess that she starts moving the pieces on the ceiling, trying to find a better move at a point in the game where maybe she made an error. So it's really a sort of beautiful illustration of a level of preoccupation and intensity and desire that is kind of temperament. That is sort of built in and kind of hard to teach. If you see somebody with this level of intensity, even if they're scrawny or they don't have much of a swing yet, you may want to pay attention to them. Because the students who can't sleep at night because they're replaying their round have the potential for greatness. So a fun, simplest way to assess for preoccupation is ask your students, especially the juniors, have you ever practiced for more than 4 hours in a day? Someone who stayed there hitting 3-footers for 2.5 hours until they were satisfied is a very talented person with unknown potential. And that's kind of a fun thing. And that sort of need for, it's related to perfectionism. It's something you've probably seen and noticed, but I'm trying to amplify this for you. That this is a big ticket item. Even as important as like, they're big and strong and powerful. So I'm going to go briefly into a model of working with addiction that's totally relevant to change and golf coaching. Okay? Let me show you this model. This is a very well-known model. It doesn't matter. This is called stages of change. So whether you're trying to quit smoking or cut down on drinking or other substance use, we have this model that there's a stage of change, and the clinician's job is to assess where they are in the change process. Now, pre-contemplation is, sometimes drinking affects my life negatively, and they're there for therapy to potentially talk about their drinking, but the reality is they're in pre-contemplation. I'm going to give you a funny example of pre-contemplation. I was practicing at my club, working on some stuff Terry showed me, and trying to sort of increase speed, which is a lot of us want to do. As I was leaving, I heard a member talking to the pro, ushering him in to take over the TrackMan, and he said, just getting older, really want to add more speed. I said, I know how you can add more speed. He says, oh yeah, how? I said, I added 11 miles an hour with heavy squats and deadlifts. So he says, oh yeah, how are your knees? Like sort of, sending me up. Like, I said, never better, which is true, actually. Strength training has made my body feel better than ever. What did he say when I said never better, doesn't hurt my knees? He didn't say, maybe I should consider lifting. He said, never. I said never better. He says, how's your back? So it's like the idea that he would not take in the information that devoted strength training would add speed. So this is an example of pre-contemplation. Just make the analogy to any sort of aspect of it changing a player's game. They may come to you for lessons, but be in pre-contemplation. Contemplation is they're kind of on the fence. Part of them really wants to and is ready to make a change, and another part of them is really resisting because change is hard and elicits lots of negative feelings that we are motivated to avoid and not feel. So over time, and this again would be useful for a little module to learn a basic model like this of how do you notice pre-contemplation, contemplation, and moving more into preparation and action. Preparation is they're ready to make changes, and you're really starting to talk about actual, in terms of coaching, real technical changes or substantial, a change of grip is very uncomfortable initially. Someone who's really prepared and ready to do that would be at the more preparation and action stage. So what do I do when I sense hesitation and change in therapy is I assess barriers. And I hope these tools that I'm going to discuss here really are directly relevant to coaching. So an example of an emotional commitment as a barrier is this example is so interesting that in Terry's segment, I've never met Chris Como, I'd love to one day. It was fascinating. He did the assessment for grip and post on Chris, and if you watch the clip, he starts to strike those little half swings to show him that side on is better than side under. I know the language pretty well now. And then he turns to Terry and says, but I prefer my grip under, even though I know it affects my ball flight poorly. So a tour level coach had an internal commitment which affects his motivation to change his grip. So a skilled coach listens for beliefs that interrupt the learning process that are just outside of awareness. He said, I prefer it under. And he might have identifications like he loves Dustin Johnson. So Dustin Johnson is under, so Chris Como wants to be under. And these are legitimate, you gotta believe me here. This is not like some kooky psychologist coming in and telling you, this is the reality of why students don't change. They have internal beliefs and commitments and fears and emotions that prevent the learning process going as well as it could. And so a skilled coach is going to pick up on those internal beliefs and start to discuss them with them. And what makes change so painful is loss. It's loss. It's you can't have your hand, I know you want to have your hand under, But if you want to play your best golf, on the side is going to be best for you. That's kind of joining them with empathy, and we'll talk more about empathy, and acknowledging the loss of sort of a way to play. I've heard Terry say many times, your ball flight is not optional, right? Depending on your body and your assessment, you're really built to play a certain ball flight. You're losing the possibility of really preferred playing a draw. That was something I'm still struggling with. I want to play a pretty 2-yard draw also, but I'm side cover, and now I'm loving a powerful fade. So these are the realities of what keeps people from learning. Loss of preference, like the Como example. I just love Adam Scott's swing. It's so beautiful, those parallel lines. Well, sorry, you're going to hit the ball best from a slightly closed stance because of all the reasons you understand about the ultimate golf lesson and assessing players' anatomy. This is a really interesting one. The worry of the unknown, right? This is a type of anxiety is, if I change my grip, what if I can never hit the ball again? I'm a 5 handicap, I'm trying to get better. This is the contemplation stage of change, which is, I want to get better. But I'm afraid my game will be completely lost if I change my grip. So the worry of the unknown during the change process elicits a very deep kind of anxiety that can be a huge barrier to change. This is a subtle one, conflicts over dependence. Does my pro really know what he's talking about? Can I really trust him to make this change? That's where letting them look up to you and idealize you as the strong, all-knowing parent is useful. So not resisting being put into a position of almost like perfection and very powerful. And frankly, there are unconscious commitments to ideas of the right swing. All the stuff on social media and YouTube videos and online gurus, this is an uphill climb. But this knowledge I'm trying to present to you and how to listen for these things, you could say, I'm getting the sense that you really think this is the right way to swing. But based on your assessment, we've learned that most likely this is going to work better for you. That's addressing their internal conflict at the contemplation level and moving them down the road of higher motivation to change. That's what I'm talking about. And this is the most important thing probably. Learning to use empathy in your teaching. Not just listening, but communicating these subtle observations. It's the single most powerful way to help support a student dealing with this change process. Accurate empathy. Examples would be, I really know you like to put your trail hand under. You really want to hit a draw. I can see that. Right? Maybe they're using side bend or something like that. It's very uncomfortable standing more to the left now. Keep at it. It will be better. You're going to hit it better. Joining them in these internal commitments and beliefs, and then helping support a change process. You're disappointed in the results and starting to wonder if your old swing is better. All of these statements qualify as empathy, because empathy is putting yourself in the other person's shoes and describing that in a compassionate and connected way. Talk about establishing rapport. You use more empathy in your lessons, your students will be obsessed with you and they will commit to coming. When I use empathy in therapy, it's the linchpin to people coming back and wanting to engage in treatment with me in an ongoing way. This is a really interesting one. This is about reals and feels and perception. This is a nuanced understanding and use of empathy. You change their stance just a little bit. All coaches must have felt this. I've taught my friends over years and years. You open their stance 1 inch. How does it feel? I feel like I'm aimed 30 yards left. Reals and feels. You say, all I've done is set you up square. That's not empathy. When you say, all you've done is, you've only opened their stance a bit because they were aimed 20 yards to the right or whatever. And you say, I know it feels uncomfortable. You must feel like your body is so wide open, but just try to stay with it. Trust me, I'm setting you up in a better position for your game. That's empathy, support,
support for the change. So validating the perception in their body is critical to helping them make the change. Once you see the student ready to change, you're more in the preparation and action phase. And I want to sort of make there's a beautiful link I noticed in Mike Adams' way of teaching all the way back to Harvey Penick. And this is from Kathy Whitworth's book, the Little Book of Golf Wisdom. And there's a direct link from Harvey to Mike. And what that is this is from Kathy's, by the way, second or third most winning LPGA professional in history. 80 wins or something like that. Harvey didn't tell me to get into any positions. Mike, Terry, you guys hate positions. It's dynamic movements. He'd just say, after you get yourself lined up, the last thought I want you to have is to clip the grass in front of the ball. An actionable thing to do, right? So what does Mike say? Mike says all the technology, we have better eyes. But you really carry his spirit, Mike, because what you'll say is, you're not going to say, you're not going to go into the sort of underlying physics of the principle necessarily. So I don't tell them to swing more to the right, discuss path. He says, I tell them to close their stance and they do it automatically. That's the link from Harvey to Mike and to you. What you can do when they're ready for change is give them actionable steps to take, and they'll make those changes. But the subtlety is, depending on where they are in that sequence of motivation and change, they may not be ready to take that advice yet. And that's the difference between having technical knowledge and communicating it to your students over time. So do different students have different communication styles? This came up yesterday. They were talking to Pia and Lim. Not really, right? The cultural stuff, that's about arousal management. Different students, different players are going to have emotional proclivities. But you don't teach, in my view, necessarily. If you start using more empathy and connecting with them and voicing your understanding of what's uncomfortable, using emotional language, you feel worried this is going to ruin your game. You look scared as I open your stance slightly. You are going to grease the wheels of change. It's not they have different styles. It's using more of your eyes and your understanding of putting yourself in their shoes, I guarantee will increase motivation and accelerate the change and learning process. And by the way, they'll feel understood and good, and lessons will feel great. People leave and feel understood and seen by you, being that big, strong parent. It actually makes them feel good and is good in and of itself. Empathy is healing in and of itself. So you'll be astounded by the results, just more empathy and eliciting feedback. What does it feel like? How does that feel? Oh my God, coach, it feels like I'm so open. I know, we changed your stance and it feels really uncomfortable. Empathy like that is the most important thing. And attaboys and encouragement. I can see how hard you're trying to stick with it. Nice job. Wow, you really did it that time. How much do you actually offer free, emphatic attaboys to your students? That's one thing I'd like you to take from today. So more than different styles, creativity in coaching and sort of developing your human skills and teaching them comes in listening also for like custom keys, right? Like this is the genius I've seen in Terry with me and in other students already, is a little phrase will pop up from your student. You know, he'll say, okay, your side cover and your elbow's out more. And someone might say, oh, it's like a soft elbow. Boom, soft elbow. You pick up on that and say, yeah, soft elbow. What a beautiful little tailored, creative swing key for that player. So more than different styles, the individual is going to have like creative little bubbles up of learning these new ideas, and that becomes their custom tailored sort of feels and swing keys that you can actually listen for and incorporate into future lessons and sort of how they can play their best. Someone I heard they would do it was side on center post. He's like, I just feel like a barn door opening and closing. I was like, barn door. It's perfect. Just swing like you're opening and closing a barn door, just flushing it. Right? So that's where this idea of how do you tailor your lessons to particular students comes to bear. More empathy and listening for those sort of subjective feels that people will start to generate automatically. Talented therapists listen for little feels of changing their relationships and their sort of coping style. So that's the parallel here. And that's real creativity that comes from experience and practice. I'm going to move through this. Taking this a golf history, I think, is for another time. But asking about, like, who did they learn from? Who do they admire? Oh, Adam Scott's swing is so beautiful. That's going to give you clues about the barriers to change. We always take a history as a therapist to learn about their childhood experiences with the idea of what from early on is affecting their current life experience. So this is just my sort of reflection on just how ambitious Mike and Terry and all of those that they work with are in terms of bringing together human skills, incredible technical knowledge for assessment and teaching the grips and posts. And what I believe is that